What's up, guys? Welcome back to another one in our series of faction reviews here, or domain reviews for Birthright, 2nd Ed D&D. And we were finishing up here, or getting close to finishing up here on our domains of the Western Coast, and this is the other domain section, so basically a non-political entity here. So previous video, we looked at the Northern Imperial Temple of Halen, and an interesting thing here with these other domains of the Western Coast, at least the main ones listed here, is, and this is interesting for players, of course, too, is that each of these domains, so the temple, the guild, and the sources here, the ruler of the political domain is also the ruler of these other domains. So if you are interested in playing those, you basically get to double up on the types of domain that you run, and also the resources and things like that, but also sort of you inherit double the issues, whereas you got to deal with all the things in your political domain. You have to then deal with the corresponding issues of whether it's your church or the guild or your source network. So in that sense, pretty powerful in some ways to be able to start with all of that, but again, double the work and double the responsibilities and double the potential enemies too. So anyway, today we're going to focus specifically on the Brosen Royal Guild and the guild situation here in the West. So as it says here at the top, most guilders of the West remain under the control of their domain's rulers. So Arian Borthane, and then Facelies Slorer. I'm probably butchering that one, but for example, you'll see those in just a second. Still, a couple of guilders try to milk the Western Coast for its riches without the explicit consent of the regents there. So, but specifically the Brosen Royal Guild, the main one we're focusing on here. So listed as neutral evil, though here's a typo, I do believe, otherwise it doesn't really make much sense. Not available for PCs. But the ruler here is Ariane Mierlen, she's the ruler or the Duchess of Brosengae, as we've covered earlier in our series on the Western Coast here. And for her to not, if you're running the country, it wouldn't make any sense whatsoever that you couldn't then run the guild itself. So that's certainly a typo, and I would treat it as such and recommend anybody else to do that as well. Anyway, she does have extensive guild holdings, obviously dominating the areas in Brosengae, and that's where you also see the law holdings. But with her sort of at least nominal alliance and sort of being under the thumb of Avenel, she has expanded holdings there as well. But also as far north as Tuornan, so some things there, and actually some sizable holdings there. Two level 3 guild holdings is nothing to sniff at. That being said, being geographically located where it is, that does in some ways limit some of your expansion, but certainly should an effort should be made to, if you're ruling up your provinces there, certainly keeping your guilds and making sure no one else encroaches into your own territory. And then if it ever comes to pass where you might be able to expand your physical domain, that would be, of course, an area then to try and muscle in as well. And maybe expansion of your guilds first is a way to precipitate that. So sort of working behind the scenes to then cause enough sort of political / maybe military opportunity to expand your own territory here. So what does the guild give you? So it's got 34 regency generated, or generates 34, has 12 accumulated, 13 gold bars as well. However, as in the previous description with Brosengae and here, she does spend most of her time, or most of the money, on the upkeep of her household, sort of trying to make it the example of anywhere in courtly life. And in that sense, in some ways probably overspending, but to sort of put on this not quite charade, but this official public face of having sort of a high-end court there. But of course that will, in in-game terms, pay off as far as like diplomatic actions and things like that. Anyway, as we've seen before, so her stats there show she is a level 7 thief should you choose to play as her, and certainly would be recommended there. Very solid bloodline, neutral evil though, keep that in mind. And as it says here, so she doesn't have the time to devote herself fully to either her kingdom or the guild, but that hasn't affected her profits so far. The Brosen Guild now faces some stiff competition from guilds slowly moving down from the northern marches, and we'll see that in just a second, some of the other ones here. But again, when we go back to our video on Brosengae, so that is one of your sort of big issues, being divided between these two domains, and certainly that's where I think recruiting some capable and trustworthy, as much as you can trust anybody, lieutenants to help you manage those a little bit more effectively. So, and finding a way to sort of either generate more revenue, which might be in the form of expanding new holdings and things like that, or just raising your levels up wherever possible, and similarly things like that on the political side, just to sort of gain a little bit more of a cushion, and still maintain that opulence of the court life that you're uh, trying to at least portray here, at least initially, and then sort of starting sort of maybe like a war chest, not necessarily for actual military action, but more along the lines of medium to long term plans, and as far as like serious expansion in one way or another for yourself and or your guild. So those are things to consider there. Now, speaking of which, it mentioned some competition here from guilds in the north, kind of making their way down. So let's take a look at that. So other guild holdings. So we have the Tegan Outfitters, basically in Tegas, and that's just to your north. We've covered that there, and again, um, would be, at least initially, a little bit difficult to dislodge them. Certainly similar with Borroween, Arian Borthane kind of being under Borroween's thumb there. That's not really going to be a strategy for success. The Upper Annuir traders are also found in Borroween. Again, best to steer clear of that, I would say, until other opportunities present themselves, and see what basically, if anything ever happens, like a serious clash between Avenel and Borroween, kind of sort of making sure your survival happens, and then figuring out which way to go from there. Of course, Row of Manslayer is an issue too. Andean and Sons, that's again Telenier and the Sirens Realm, so that's one of the northern ones that's gradually encroaching down into the western coast. And similarly, the Stjordvik traders, Stormholsten, has some holdings in Borroween and Telenier as well. So again, pretty far from you for the moment, but I think really where your expansion is going to come, if at all possible, is a little bit in Avenel, if that's allowable. But really, I think working into Tornin, at least initially, is going to be a better strategy. While still, I think, steering clear of Endier. I don't think you really have the resources or abilities, at least at the outset, of dealing with his guild network, um, and other sort of resources he has now. Politically, militarily, could he be crushed by any of his major neighbors? Sure, but we'll get to that when we cover the Heartlands. And I would, again, just steer clear of that initially until you have at least more resources at your disposal and figured out which way the wind's kind of blowing between Borroween and Avenel, and what is going to happen there. And similarly, if there's an opportunity to perhaps take over Tagos at some point, that could be something there, which should give you plenty of work to do in the meantime. Um, but again, you have the other issues that you have to deal with that we discussed in the Brosengae video, as far as political and other sort of existential threats there. So certainly something to work on, but nonetheless a fun one. And again, ignoring, as I would say, the not available for PCs, that certainly should not be the case. So definitely another fun one here, especially if you're running Brosengae, that you get to double up on this guild as well. So let us know in the comments, guys, if you've run Brosengae or specifically just focused on the Royal Guild part of it. What have your experience has been here on the Western Coast with that? A little bit overall less cutthroat, I'd say, than what we've seen so far on the Southern Coast. But once we get to the Heartlands, we'll see that that's a pretty nasty situation there with some of the underground things going on in the guilds. But nonetheless, let us know in the comments what you think, guys, and leave us a like and subscribe if you haven't already. And stay tuned. We'll be covering Harold Corian next for the sources, and then that will finally wrap up the West Coast, and we will move on to the Heartlands. Thanks again so much for stopping by, guys. We'll see you in the next one.